Welcome to No2Nato No2War. This is our third public meeting. The first two have now been watched by hundreds of thousands of people, making these the biggest anti-war meetings since the great upheaval in 2003 around the invasion and subsequent illegal and murderous occupation of Iraq. That's because this organization is an action organization. It is not consumed by the narcissism of the small difference. As a matter of fact, our speakers all have substantial disagreements with each other on many other things, but have concluded that stopping the world going up in nuclear smoke is much more important than any political differences we might have with each other. There's no in crowd at No2Nato No2War. There's no permanent roster of speakers. People are not shadow banned and deleted from history, airbrushed. There's no litmus test. And above all, we are bringing interesting new voices onto the battlefield in a way that is capturing people's attention and exciting them about the possibility of rebuilding a mass anti-war movement in the world, and perhaps particularly in the English-speaking world, which is, I'm afraid to say, where most of the problems of the world are originating. Civil war is raging as I speak. Buildings are on fire, cars are on fire, protesters carrying guns and even grenades are on the streets. 40,000 armed police officers have been deployed to baton, to gas, to water cannon, to smoke, and even to shoot unarmed protesters. I refer, of course, not to Russia, but to France. The war is coming home. The proximate reason for the dramatic events unfolding again this evening in France are the gunning down of a 17-year-old boy, an unarmed boy, illicitly, allegedly, driving a motor car in the French city of Nanterre. But of course, that's only the proximate reason. French people have been moving in their millions, sometimes with yellow vests on, sometimes without. Sometimes about pension reform, sometimes about France's role in the world as a leading belligerent in the now existential struggle between the NATO powers and the adversaries NATO has chosen to confront, namely Russia and China, although they have others if you want them. Venezuela may or may not come back onto the enemy roster. Iran has never been off it. Indeed, the scenes that we are witnessing in France this evening are the very scenes that France was encouraging in Iran just a year or so ago. Let's hope that the French President Macron does not suffer the grisly end that the Libyan leader, Colonel Gaddafi, suffered at the hands of, amongst others, France. France and the United Kingdom and the USA destroyed Libya, blew its bloody doors off, to use a Michael Caine-ism. And now 500,000 African men are massing in Libya, desperately looking for a way across the Mediterranean into the European countries who call themselves the Garden and who seek to keep the jungle, in Borrell's words, at bay, but who, having destroyed Libya as a functioning state, have unwittingly, perhaps, opened the doors to that new invasion. All around the southern Mediterranean, countries like Italy, like Spain, and like France are in serious trouble with their economies and with the dysfunctionality of their society. And yet, most of their time they spend obsessing about events in countries far distant from them. Borrell, the European Union's foreign minister, called on all of the EU's navies to sail their ships, not in the Mediterranean, not in the English Channel, not to defend their own coasts, their own lands, but in the Taiwan Straits and in the South China Sea. That, said Borrell, is freedom's frontier. So now we know the European Union satrapies are fully signed up, with one or two exceptions, to the permanent war which has been declared in Washington. In Washington, we now discover that the leader of what they used to laughingly call the free world sleeps in an iron lung. That's right. He sleeps in a machine to enable him to breathe, but not, alas, to think, not, alas, to read an auto cue, not, alas, to find his way safely off a stage, not, alas, to stop him falling over repeatedly on public platforms, on stairs to aircraft, and elsewhere. What a state we are in. Some people don't believe in karma. Some people don't believe in any kind of divine justice or retribution. I find it hard to avoid the conclusion that those who set the world on fire, who set out to subjugate, to dominate, and to exploit the others, are now amongst the most dysfunctional societies on the planet. And those that they targeted are, compared to them, at least, a model of functionality, and economically speaking, are outperforming them exponentially. Somebody said the other day, when I put up a video that got 1 million views in less than 48 hours, where are the poor Russians in that video? The perception in Europe that somehow Russia is a poor country is an enduring one. But this year for the first time, Russians, the average Russian, was better off than the average European. This in the teeth of a level of economic warfare being carried out against Russia by the Western countries, who constitute just 13% of the world's population, has never been more ferocious. They said that they would crush the Russian currency, the ruble. In fact, they crushed their own currencies. Or at least we crushed the pound and the euro. The dollar is not yet crushed, but it exists in its current form and at its current value only because it is used as a reserve currency and the currency for the transaction of oil trades, both of which are now under grave and growing threat. The list of countries seeking to join the BRICS, which was originally Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, is now so large that it tests the very English alphabet to properly describe it. A new acronym from A to Z will very soon be required. Countries that were for decades not just satrapies of the United States and other Western countries have now thrown off the shackle of colonialism, not just run their own flag up in place of the British or the American flag. No, they have literally thrown off the shackles. Countries in Africa, like Niger, like Mali, have ordered France to leave their countries and begun arresting armed Frenchmen found on their soil. Countries like Saudi Arabia, long a byword for a satrapy, have begun to cold shoulder the United States and trade with the enemies of the United States in their own currency and seek to join the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The world is changing fast. The tectonic plates can audibly be heard moving, and the leaders of the Western countries have never been less well placed to meet the challenge. It didn't have to be like this. We could have all warmed under the rising sun in the east of the globe. We could have all traded with each other, invested in each other, cooperated with each other. We could have all been warm. Instead, our leaders have chosen the path of confrontation and war. The war, for the moment, is in the Ukraine and being conducted over the dead bodies of the Ukrainian people. Now, some 300,000 or more dead. 1 in 3 people in Ukraine knows well someone who has died in this conflict, a doubling of the proportion in just 3 months since the last survey was taken. And the average number of people that have died in the conflict that the respondents to the survey knew was 3. And most of those casualties are coming from the west of Ukraine. Something like 65% of the casualties are coming from the bastions of Ukrainian nationalism, and in the Second World War, during the Holocaust, the bastions of Bandera and the other Nazi collaborators who fell upon their own Jewish population and Polish population like wolves, like savage beasts, even before the SS has got there. It couldn't be clearer, I think. This week there was an attack on Kramatorsk. It was originally spun on the BBC and Sky News and elsewhere as an attack on a peaceful restaurant. A peaceful restaurant, it turned out, that contained 2 generals of the Ukrainian armed forces, 15 other senior officers, 50 foreign advisors and mercenaries, and an untold number of other secret services operatives from Western countries, from NATO countries. It was a stunning military success, which unfortunately also killed the young women that had been gathered there as society hostesses for the dinner of the top brass of the Ukrainian military and their NATO allies. The war is going very badly, as anyone with access to any alternative media, whether social media or via VPN, Russian media, which has been banned in the name of freedom in the vast majority of territories in the so-called Western world. Anyone can see that the spring counteroffensive, which became a summer counteroffensive, has fallen, in the words of The Economist and the Wall Street Journal, woefully short of being described as a success. First it was the rains, then it was unexpectedly stiff Russian resistance, then it was mines, then it was the extraordinary fortifications which the Russian armed forces have built over these last few months. The attempted coup d'etat last weekend failed miserably and has now reached the levels of farce. But the Russian people showed in the teeth of that attempted coup d'etat that they are fully behind their country, fully behind their state, fully behind their president. I'm a supporter myself of Mr. Zhuganov, the leader of the political opposition to the Putin government in the Russian Duma. He stepped up to the mark without hesitation and gave his unequivocal support to the president and to the republic and to the armed forces of the Russian Federation. All efforts to destabilize and divide and eventually dismember Russia are doomed to fail, as any perspicacious observer already knows. They depend on a lack of perspicacity on the part of the mass of the people. And that's where we come in. We, all of us, have our own platforms. We are all able to reach people. We have to make available the alternative point of view, the different perspective, even just so that people can say they heard both sides of the argument. But I'm confident that when they hear our side of the argument, that they will side with us. And all the signs are that that is so. As censorship is increased, it is a sign not of strength, but of weakness of the war party. We're the anti-war party. And moreover, we believe that war will always be with us as long as NATO holds the Europeans, the North Americans, and the Australasians and the Japanese in the grip of their hand. We have to break that grip. And all of us are trying to do that with our own arguments in our own way. Even where we disagree on so many other things, we must come together. Or there may not be a world worth arguing over. There may not be a world for any of us to win. So as always, we have assembled an interesting platform that I will now introduce. First of all is a man who has set fire to the internet. You may have seen him on my own shows. You may have watched him, I hope you have, on his own shows. He is never off the screen with a level of analysis, criticism, and an entertaining style that is second to none. For one so young, he's a big star. He's Richard Medhurst, and I call him in now. Richard, where do you see things in the wake of last weekend's events and the subsequent failures this week of the so-called counter-offensive?
Hi, George. Thanks for the kind words, and that was a great opening speech. And well, first of all, when it comes to Prigozhin and this so-called coup or mutiny or whatever people want to call it, I think it was funny watching their so-called analysis on CNN and other mainstream platforms, because they couldn't grasp, they couldn't understand that Prigozhin and Putin coming to a negotiated settlement or a peaceful resolution was a good thing, right? So they interpreted any form of de-escalation or diplomacy as weakness, right? And I'm sure if Putin had wiped out Prigozhin, then they would have called him a butcher. So you can't really win with them. And this idea that Putin lacked the forces to tackle Wagner, I mean, it's preposterous, because on the one hand they're saying that Putin has so many weapons and such an army that he's laying waste to Ukrainian cities, but he can't take on a 25,000 force. And this is if you believe that they were actually going to go to war, with each other. Although Putin did speak about a helicopter being shot down. The Ukrainians say it's about 12 Russian servicemen killed, but that's besides the point. And when it comes to this counteroffensive, they've been hyping this up for ages, and trying to raise money, siphon off funds away from countries, from that money being invested, instead of being invested in England or in the United States, where they don't even have a healthcare system in the United States, nothing to speak of. They gave all these billions to Ukraine. And then we saw what happened with the Bradleys, which are the American tanks, and the Leopards, the German tanks, a smoking column of twisted metal. That's the counteroffensive. And what did they expect? The Russians have been dug in. The Russians are a professional fighting force. They're not a joke. And they've been constructing trenches, tank ditches, tank traps, mines, and it's horrific. I mean, I think some of you might have seen the videos captured by drones men trying to get out of minefields. It's something from a horror movie and beyond. So, they're basically taking all of this money that should be spent on healthcare, spent on infrastructure, and giving it to the weapons companies. And they like to frame it as aid to Ukraine, but the only ones that they're aiding are their friends in the arms industry. So, and then the Ukrainian men who have to go off and fight this war, this hopeless war, they're also the ones being sacrificed. They're the pawns that they're sending off. Another thing, this pizzeria or restaurant in Kramatorsk that you mentioned that was attacked in the last 48 hours. There were civilians in there, right? And I think I don't need to remind you of the Troubles, but during the Troubles, it was considered a valid target. If you had British soldiers frequenting a bar or a pub or a disco, then that was fair game for the IRA and vice versa, right? So St. Patrick's Day bombing, for example, people killed just for being Catholic, just because they went to this bar. So, the Ukrainian generals, the foreign mercenaries who went to this pizzeria or restaurant in Kramatorsk, they know that the Russians are watching them. They know that they are inviting hell upon the civilians and the local population who are in this bar, who are in this restaurant. And if the situation were reversed, the Ukrainians would have struck them too. And that is, I'm not going to sit here and say, well, that's just war and we should accept it. We shouldn't accept it. This should not be happening. They should not be putting civilians at risk. They know what's going to happen. They know the Russians are targeting them. And I also made the argument that the fact that they're foreign mercenaries is kind of besides the point, because
Richard has frozen there.
It turns into a target for the Russians. Yeah. I think Scott Ritter made this point. He's a former intelligence officer in the Marine Corps. He made the point that if two Ukrainian officers are speaking to each other and there's a light bulb, lighting up the room, then that energy grid becomes a target. Now, I don't necessarily agree with most of the rules of engagement that our armies have, but I just wanted to highlight the danger that they're exposing civilians to in the case of Kramatorsk. And then the Kyiv shopping center is another incident or example from last year, where they were parking tanks under the shopping center. And then, of course, there's no media, there's no critical thinking, that they have no brains in the media, so they don't bother asking questions. They just use these tragedies to continue this barrage of nonsense that Russia just likes to kill civilians for the sake of killing civilians because they're evil. And it's such a glaring contradiction, because on the one hand they tell us the Russians are incompetent, the Russians don't have any money for weapons, they've run out of weapons, and then on the other hand they tell us that they have $3 million missiles like the Iskander missile lying around just to waste on restaurants in Kramatorsk. So this is once again a glaring contradiction, the lack of critical thinking in the media is stunning. George, you alluded to the refugees that are in Libya. I would also highlight that the other week you had 750 people who drowned. There was a vessel in the Mediterranean, and the Greek authorities did nothing. They knew what was happening and did absolutely nothing. And I think this is, it's disgusting, right? Because everybody knows, wherever you are in the world, maritime law is that you see somebody drowning, you see somebody in distress, you go and help them, whether you're a destroyer or a tiny yacht or a canoe, you go and help them. And so there's such a lack of humanity, it's astonishing that they spent more attention in the media and money on this Titanic submersible than on helping people who are drowning, civilians who are drowning. And of course, I think all countries who've taken refugees should be, They should be thanked. Germany took in a lot of refugees, Canada, and so on. But at the end of the day, they are benefiting. They're benefiting from a new workforce, from young people, from people with diplomas, people who are doctors, engineers, architects, or even as they call it, non-skilled labor. I mean, it's still a new workforce for them, and I just find it's disgusting what happened to Gaddafi. You alluded to what happened to Gaddafi, and I think we should always remember that these issues, whether it's refugees that are drowning in the Mediterranean, or whether we are talking about the tragedy that has befallen Ukraine, or whether we are talking about North Africa or Syria, all of these things are linked, and we come back to NATO. At the end of the day, we come back to this war machine. Anyone who says that we need NATO to defend Europe, I'm sorry, but this is an obsolete war machine. And when we were in London during the last event, I said if we were in the 1960s, we could have a different conversation. But we're not in the 1960s, and NATO has no purpose since 1991. There is no Soviet Union. Soviet Union is it's completely gone. The Warsaw Pact has been dismantled, and so the West should also understand that it has a duty, as it conveyed to the Russian diplomats, to also step down and dismantle the war machine. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened. Yugoslavia was the first to really face the horrors of NATO, and then Libya and Syria, and now Ukraine is another victim of NATO. And this is because they want to make money. Zelensky said the other day that he's banning or suspending elections. Now, to his credit, or shall we say, just to give him the benefit of the doubt, yes, the Ukrainian constitution does mandate, or does stipulate rather, that during a time of martial law, you cannot have elections. Fine. But he is the one who renews the martial law. So he could decide on August 18th when it expires, because it has a 90-day period. He could decide not to renew it and have elections. Syria had elections, and Syria is in a far worse state than Ukraine
had two
is.
elections.
Exactly, right. So what's his excuse? If he's so confident of his mandate, then there should be no problem. Obviously, again, to give him the benefit of the doubt, I understand it's not an ideal situation, but why is he banning Russian books? This is just last week, Russian books and Belarusian books. Why did he ban all the other parties? I think it might be hard to have elections when you've banned all the other parties.
Yes.
And then banning religious groups linked to Russia. So is this the democratic champion that NATO and the EU have put forward? If yes, I think we're in a very sorry state.
Well, sadly, it is indeed a sorry state. Richard Medhurst, thanks. We'll hear from you again later. Let me introduce Anastasia Battle, who is the editor-in-chief of Leonora magazine of the Schiller Institute and organizer of the International Peace Coalition. Anastasia is, I think, in the United States. Welcome, Anastasia. Joe Biden said that you would not be sending American troops to Ukraine, but there sure seem to be rather a few American troops in Kramatorsk, judging by their tattoos and the insignia that they were wearing. What's going on?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that the United States, the British, NATO, all these countries are trying to get a nuclear war going by any means necessary. And I really want to situate this crisis and what's happening in that this is not coming from a position of strength. What you're seeing with the United States, what you're seeing with, Boris Johnson sabotaging peace between Russia and Ukraine, all these different things, this is coming because you have a collapsing empire, right? This old financial system, all these old families, their system is hopelessly bankrupt. There's somewhere around $2 quadrillion in debt just on the books of these banks and derivatives, mortgage-backed securities, all these different things. And just actually similar to what you were talking about, what you've seen is an emerging system on the planet which is threatening that system. It's threatening this old empire, right? What you see with the BRICS, what you see with China, what you see with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Belt and Road Initiative, right? What you're seeing is a new formation of humanity where people are coming together to sit at the table for development as opposed to war, right? And that is the biggest threat to empire. How are they supposed to control nations if they can't keep a stranglehold on you with bank loans? How can they, keep you under control if they can't, force you to give up your currency or your right to currency? And I think that this is a really important point to emphasize, because a lot of times when these, PSYOP operations happen, it gets really confusing and everybody starts talking all sorts of nonsense. They're talking to various gossip circles. I agree with Scott Ritter. I think that, I think Scott Ritter has the best view on this standpoint and what happened. And where we go from here in terms of pulling together every single peace organization on this planet, because at the rate that we're going and at the rate that the United States is talking, in particular, this resolution that says that if the nuclear power plant is bombed, then we would immediately enact the NATO Charter 5, Article 5 resolution. Right? You're looking at nuclear war down the barrel at this point. This is not avoidable any longer. And whatever people's differences are or problems, I'll just say this. If you're not being attacked and slandered and smeared all across the board, then there's something, you're not doing anything. You're not accomplishing anything at this point. So I think we need to really relish in the fact that this empire is collapsing and have a huge representation of the population of the world. Most people do not want nuclear war, right? You talk to regular people on the street, nobody says, oh yes, I'd like to die in a nuclear holocaust. That would be lovely. Nobody says that. What we need to do is break people out of this mentality where they've been really, it's been like years of brainwashing and smashing their identities, really making them peasants. You see this problem in the United States too. Americans hate it when you call them peasants, but that's how they've been acting. That, oh, I can't do anything. I'm not in power. I have no power. I can't. It's like, no, that's not what power is. Power does not come from might makes right. Real power comes from the ability to inspire another person to think and to act. So on August 6th, which we've been in discussion with you guys, I'm very happy to be working with you. This is really wonderful. No to NATO, no to war in the UK. But we also have many groups from all over the world, in Germany, in France, in Italy, who are now coming together. We're going to have a big show of the population against nuclear war, big demonstrations all over the world, August 6th, which is the anniversary of the bombing of Hiroshima. And this is the most appropriate time for us to come out and make a stand. And people should be doing other things like I've been doing, like Jose Vega's been doing. We've been doing interventions, right? Nonviolent direct action. These have to be nonviolent. If you can't be nonviolent, then don't do it. You're not actually representing something which is going to be productive. We have to be nonviolent. We have to create the government and the world that we want to see. What do we want to create? We can't just be upset at everything and blow it all to pieces. We need to create something better. And that's what my good friend of mine and the head of our organization, Helga Tsepp-LaRouche, that's what we've been organizing for well over a year now, called the creating a new system of security and development in the world. Creating a new system which incorporates all nations, where everybody can actually have this dialogue, because it's not even just, between Russia and the United States, or Russia or whatever, Russia and NATO. There are the whole global South. I mean, this is the majority of the world's population. Why aren't people from there being heard? They're not. So that's what we're doing with this group, the International Peace Coalition. And I really encourage, Richard, George, join us tomorrow on the meeting. We're going to be working out some of these details and getting more ideas around to really make this happen. We have to work together, and we need to get as many people as we can involved in this process.
Anastasia, thank you for that. You're well named, Anastasia Battle,
Thank
doing
you.
battle against the warmongers. Much appreciated. Now, in the hope that Patrick Henningsen has arrived, let me introduce him. He was one of the speakers in the last meeting. He was so popular, his contribution went so well. Unusually, we brought him back for a reprise just as early as the very next meeting. He is of 21st Century Wire. Many of you have seen and heard him. He's an outstanding analyst, commentator, radio and television presenter, and an all-round first-class man. Patrick has joined us. Patrick, let me ask you what I asked Anastasia. To what extent are the Americans now involved in this war in Ukraine? And to what extent do the American people know that?
Yeah, we've been told that we're not directly at war with Russia, and we're only providing assistance. We've been told this for the last 18 months. But the truth is, George, our assistance, so to speak, has been going on for years, the better part of a decade, actually. So the building up of a proxy army for NATO, that Ukraine is a NATO member state in everything but name. This is NATO equipped to NATO standard, with NATO instructions, military support, NATO reconnaissance, NATO technical support, all the different instructors, some of which were at the unfortunate location of the arrival of the Iskander missile at the pizzeria in Kramatorsk. But this is one of the problems with the arming of Ukraine by the West, is that although we're dumping all of our equipment and all of our military gear in there, those require Western instructors and technical teams. Otherwise, they're more or less useless. That goes for the tank groups. That goes for any jets that are parked in Ukraine or parked in Poland, whatever. These are going to be. There's going to require a large attachment of Western military personnel, engineers, and specialists. So, and if as soon as they're not there, then the tanks don't roll. In fact, this is what happened in Iraq. The Abrams tank division, which was gifted to the Iraqi government, had to be maintained by a U.S. Group, a technical team, and that technical support was withdrawn only weeks before the emergence of ISIS in Mosul. That was a fact told to me by Abu Mahdi Mohandes, who unfortunately died alongside Qasem Soleimani, General Soleimani, in the double assassination at the hands of the United States and Israel. So that's a little known fact, but that goes to show you that all of this gear is useless without a large number of military instructors and specialists. But so that said, we are at war with Russia, using Ukraine as the third party pitch for this war. So there should be no question about that. We're so invested in the West politically, whole political careers, governments have wagered everything on this war, that it's going to be, that Ukraine is going to be victorious in the end. All political capital, real capital in terms of money, finance, the reputation of NATO is also on the line. Don't be fooled by NATO saying NATO's never been so united. We've never had so much solidarity in Europe and NATO. When you hear Ursula von der Leyen or Jens Stoltenberg saying this, nothing could be further from the truth. They're in danger of fracturing permanently, because the reckoning of this failed proxy war will damage NATO's reputation forever. So they realize their credibility, their existence is hanging by a thread, and it's really hanging by a whole series of propaganda threads, or propaganda yarns, to be a little more apt. So this has been the problem, and Vilnius is coming up the NATO summit in Vilnius in Lithuania is coming up in just a couple of weeks, and I would expect that some big announcements would be due, because they have to make big announcements about doing something or some incident that would coincide with the NATO summit, would also provide that impetus, that pretext for continued support for this increasingly unpopular proxy war. So what could that possibly be? And it was interesting that in the run-up to the coup that wasn't a coup over the weekend, an extraordinary drama that played out, an intra-military mutiny, if you will, in Russia. In the run-up to this, the 72 hours before this was just nonstop propaganda and building up this idea that Russia was going to attack itself for the third time, but this time at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. And so Russia was going to attack itself again, and then this would be an international incident, and it's a fait accompli. It's just everyone's speaking, whether it was Zelensky tweeting, whether it was Senator Richard Blumenthal and Lindsey Graham screaming about it from the pulpit at the press room at the U.S. Senate, or whether it was the government in Kiev or one of the ministers warning about it, or the press. Where did this idea come from? So clearly, NATO is planning something. They're building up to some sort of a crescendo on this issue of a nuclear incident, okay? And so lo and behold, the coup that wasn't a coup unfolds over the weekend, and it really sucked the oxygen right out of this buildup they had for this incident, which clearly is being telegraphed regarding Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. So what could Russia possibly gain from attacking itself in an area and a power station that it controls? Another critical piece of infrastructure, like the Nord Stream pipeline, for instance, or like the Kharkovka Dam. As another example. So yet another potential opportunity, which, if you think about it, George, there are very few entry points for NATO or the European Union, or under whatever aegis peacekeeping forces would be inserted into this situation. There are very few viable entry points. So in order to galvanize international support, if it was, for instance, as they're building this up, a potential Chernobyl-like incident that would affect, quote, this would affect Europeans, etc. So downwind from the nuclear incident. So they're building up the Chernobyl narrative, and that Russia's irresponsible, and that they're going to do this reckless act of nuclear terrorism, okay? A dirty bomb, who knows what form this mythical or this false flag would take, okay? Then that would open the door for calls globally and it would be hard even for countries like China and other countries to resist if this was painted as a legitimate nuclear incident. It would be hard to resist calls for an international neutral, so-called neutral peacekeeping force under the guise of the European Union, for instance, not necessarily NATO. And so they nearly had the same identical situation, if you remember, in July of 2014. And the fighting was particularly intense in the Donbass. And then a passenger airliner, MH17, was shot down right in the middle of some of the most intense fighting front lines there. And there were immediately calls for an international, some sort of a body or groups, OECD, accompanied by maybe peacekeepers, to secure the damage of where the plane went down. So in my mind, this is still an unsolved mystery, although the Dutch Safety Board thinks otherwise. So there's a similar situation there, the same situation, George, in Syria, in multiple occasions where Syrian government and their combined forces were making progress, and lo and behold, a chemical weapons attack was staged. And so that provided the pretext for the West to fire cruise missiles, to attack Syria. This happened time and time again. This looks like one of those types of provocations. This to somehow turn the tide, or to somehow create an impasse in the fighting, because Russia's doing arguably much better than Ukraine and NATO are doing on the battlefield. So they don't have a natural entry point. So otherwise, the latest statements are that they'll have to wait till October. And if Ukraine is not successful by October for military means, then we need to put a combined Polish or Baltic force, a peacekeeping force in Western Ukraine, for instance. So there's no military path to victory for Ukraine. There are no negotiations for any ceasefires or any peace negotiations right now. So they've completely precluded anything that would stop the conflict. And so if we're fighting for democracy in the West, which we're told this is what it's all about, we're told this is about democracy. We're fighting for democracy, and if Ukraine doesn't make this stand, and we don't help them make this stand, then Putin's going to overrun Europe and fly the Russian flag off the Eiffel Tower in Paris. That's the picture that's being painted by the West. That's the narrative. And Zelensky's invoking the democracy domino theory. If they don't protect democracy in Ukraine, then from the evil Russians, then authoritarianism will rule the day and take over Europe and the West. So there's no elections. Those are suspended indefinitely in Ukraine until the war is over. Again, when will the war be over? Apparently never, or until Ukraine loses. There's no military path for victory. There are no negotiations. All the media outlets in Ukraine have been taken over by the state. Anybody who doesn't comply is being jailed, or journalists have been disappeared. Not just Gonzalo Lira, which you've spoken about, George, and which is a really concerning incident, but many other Ukrainian journalists from the moment the fighting began were disappeared from Odessa, from Kharkiv, from other parts of the country, and they're not talked about. And there are many of them. And also closing churches that are suspected of being sympathetic to Russia, for instance, forced conscription, press ganging, anybody between the age of 18 to 60. So where's the democracy in Ukraine? It seems to be the least democratic society and country in the world right now. There are single party dictatorial states that have more plurality of opinion in society than Ukraine does right now. So
they've even changed Christmas, which takes some doing to persuade an Orthodox country to move their Christmas to the Western Christmas, 25th of December. But then the Orthodox community was never asked. This was a dictatorial fiat by Zelensky. As you described it, Patrick, it struck me more and more that we may be facing, and very soon, a kind of 9/11 moment with this nuclear plant. Am I right?
Well, yeah. And something I want to mention, George, which didn't get any press coverage because of the coup that wasn't a coup over the weekend. Russia, the FSB arrested 5 individuals that were smuggling Caesium-137, which is a radioactive material, to a Ukrainian national to be used in a dirty bomb, paying $3.5 million. I don't know whether this was a sting, but this was run. You can even read about it in Reuters. Did anybody see this in any other? This should have been on the headline BBC News, CNN, all of them. It got zero coverage. So what does that tell you? There are a lot of things going on that are not getting attention in the Western media. So I think possibly Russia may have foiled a potential plot there, or exposed saboteurs or conspirators there through that. But the propaganda has resumed on this, George, this Zaporizhzhia talking point in the last couple of days, and they're really ramping it up now.
I told you he was an expert, didn't I? Let me go back to the first speaker. Richard Medhurst is half Syrian. Whatever Russia has on its plate in Ukraine, it hasn't stopped them from assisting the Syrian people and their government in rooting out the last bastions of ISIS and Al-Qaeda in Idlib. Tell us what's been happening over the last few days there, if you will.
Right. So the Russians they're still conducting strikes, and as you mentioned, the Idlib is really this Al-Qaeda stronghold, and it's funny because every time the Americans claim to have killed an ISIS leader, lo and behold, where did this take place? In Idlib, right? So this is right on. It's basically on the border with Turkey, right? So I mean, or I should say, Turkey has made it. They've annexed it, all but annexed it. That people use Turkish currency there now, and Turkey supports. Either directly or by turning a blind eye, they support Al Qaeda. So now they've rebranded. They call themselves HTS or Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. There are other groups like the so-called Syrian National Army. Just to be very clear, this is not the Syrian. The official armed forces of Syria, which are called the Syrian Arab Army. The SNA is a Turkish-backed militia or rebel group. But again, calling them rebels is kind of funny because you don't even know where most of these people come from. I mean, you've got 5,000 Uyghurs in northern Syria, in this region, in Idlib. You've got, as I mentioned, the Turkish armed forces, the Turkish-backed groups. And so this is a very precarious situation because Turkey is a NATO state, right? So we should keep that in mind, that NATO is occupying, through Turkey, is occupying a large chunk of Syria. Then we have the United States in west, east of the Euphrates River, occupying all the oil fields, occupying the crops, because this is known as the breadbasket region, and so they do that in partnership with the Kurdish militias. And then, of course, when it comes to the Russians, if it weren't for Russia, I think Al Qaeda would have almost certainly taken control of Syria. I mean, they were really already in the capital, in Jobar, and so on. And when the Russians came in, I know Patrick mentioned Soleimani earlier. There's this famous meeting that Nasrallah spoke of, that Soleimani went to Moscow to meet with Putin, and he convinced him in 2 hours to go and help in Syria, because Syria had asked Russia multiple times and they always refused. They didn't want to get mixed up in it, but he made them understand that this whole region is going to collapse entirely if they don't help. And it's only because of Hezbollah, because of Iran, and because of the Syrian army and the Russian army that Syria did not fall under fall into the shadow of ISIS. The thing is, though, that it's still carved up into 4 parts. You've got Israel that have been occupying the Golan Heights since *67. As I mentioned, now you've got Turkey in the north, America to the east, the United States to the east, and Russia is the only one that seems to be interested in fighting Al Qaeda and fighting these extremists, these foreign extremists or foreign-backed extremists, take your pick, that have come into Syria through Turkey, may I add, right? So as we're seeing this a coup that is not a coup, as Patrick said, Russia is still helping out. And there's been a question about what will become of Wagner, because you have Wagner in Africa, in some countries, deployed in a limited fashion in Mali, then in Sudan, then in Central African Republic, and also allegedly a few of them are also in Syria. So now the question is, what becomes of them? But with Syria, it's a different matter, because we're really talking about the Russian armed forces, not just about Wagner. Wagner do not play any a large role in Syria. Just to make that clear, it's really the Russian armed forces, and I think it says a lot that the Russians are being attacked by 50 nations, the majority of them NATO, and still commits resources to Syria. The Russians actually have a base in Syria, a naval base on the Mediterranean, and despite the obvious strategic value of that, it's funny because that base was in tatters. It was falling apart until the Russians came to help, along with Hezbollah and Iran, and now they have upgraded that base in the last years. It's state of the art, and has all types, all types, all sizes and shapes of Russian ships. And the funny thing is, you'll hear people complain about the Iranian presence in Syria or the growing Russian influence in Syria. I mean, you've no one to blame but yourselves, right? NATO, because if they hadn't gone through with this regime change project in Syria and hadn't destabilized Iraq next door, none of this would have happened. If you're so concerned about Russia being in Syria or Iran being in Syria. Although, again, I would leave that concern up to Syrians and not a bunch of Western think tanks who don't know their bum from their elbow. So yeah, Russia is still helping with that, but it's the front line. I mean, the lines haven't changed since 2019, you could say, right? So it's a static situation, and it's like that on purpose, because as much as Russia helps militarily, the sanctions are really killing people. And that was engineered on purpose by Mike Pompeo and Donald Trump, that, they understood militarily they cannot win. That's a lost cause, but they decided to pursue a scorched earth policy, as I call it. And so they're just starving people out in Syria with these Caesar Act sanctions, which are extremely brutal. But the thing is that the world is changing. I think Anna mentioned earlier the Belt and Road Initiative, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS. All of these institutions and systems that are now building an alternative world to what we currently have, an alternative system. Syria has made very clear, and this was the Syrian foreign minister. He's the deputy foreign minister and the minister of finance. They were talking about Syria making a formal application to BRICS, or BRICS Plus, as we should call it now, and also to join the SCO. And Belt and Road Initiative, already last year, I think, or rather 2 years ago, Syria applied for that. So all of a sudden, Turkey now want to be friends, right? I would also mention that, given it's a NATO army and the largest NATO, or second largest NATO army, I think, after no, it's the largest. Yeah, it's the largest one. So in any case, the point still stands that Erdogan wants to be friends now with Assad after trying to kill him for 10 years. But I think that's only because he's realized that the pressure, that he's realized it's a lost cause, and also this pressure on him from Iran and from Russia. Right. So I would like to highlight that point, that they're really putting pressure on him to make amends with Syria, because after all, they're neighbors, and they want to have Turkey pull out. Once Turkey pulls out, then that's already a problem halved. But not 1 inch of Syrian land is going to be ceded to Turkey, and I think they need to understand that. They're not going to get away with murder and then on top of it take away land, because after the First World War, and Lawrence had led the Arab revolt. Arabs were stabbed in the back by the Balfour Declaration and the Sykes-Picot Agreement. So you had a lot of Syrian land that was handed away to Turkey. A lot of Armenian land, by the way, that was also handed to Turkey. I often ask myself, why do African countries and a lot of Asian countries and Middle Eastern countries still keep these borders? It's a wonder to me. They should go back and redraw their own borders, not keep Western borders. But I think it's a matter of time before they leave, because they cannot sustain this occupation. And when I say they, I mean both the United States and Turkey. It's not in their interests. I think Turkey have understood that they don't want to miss out on BRICS. They don't want to miss out on Belt and Road. And so it's in their best interests to simply pull out of Syria and give back the land.
Richard Medhurst, thank you so very much for participating in this excellent meeting tonight. Anastasia, talking of people changing, whether they've genuinely changed or not, in a way doesn't matter. Donald Trump, the assassin of General Soleimani and his comrade Mohandes, is now the leader of the American anti-war movement, which is quite a metamorphosis. And of course, we've got a candidate running for the Democratic nomination, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who has been, if anything, even more stark in his positions about not just the war in Ukraine, but the United States' role in all kinds of conflicts and conflict zones. Do you take heart from that, that two people who are serious contenders to be the next president, Trump obviously more serious than Kennedy, but were Kennedy to get the Democratic nomination, my goodness, we'd all be emigrating to the US to live under his presidency, or I would anyway. Do you take heart from the fact that 2 out of the 3 probable next presidents are strongly anti-war?
Yeah, I have a couple of thoughts on this, actually. One, if RFK Jr. and Trump were to become the 2 candidates in the United States, I think we could finally have an honest election in this country and a serious debate. And that doesn't mean you have to agree with anything that either candidate has, all of their, I mean, that's the problem with party politics, right? Is that people get all chunked up on this issue or that issue. But we have to view this as a dynamic process, right? There's a whole organizing process that's taking shape that's not even just in the United States, right? This is what we were talking about with the global South, the BRICS. You have countries that are saying, hey, let's not blow each other up into a nuclear holocaust. How about we collaborate to develop with one another instead, right? That's a much better option than nuclear war. And people are hearing that, right? That's what happened with Saudi Arabia, right? This is what I think could happen with other nations in Southwest Asia. I think that's what China is working on right now. I mean, you get that whole region to be stable, then there's no more of this, these geopolitical games going on. I mean, this is the what would you call it? Like the keystone of the world, right? It's right in between all 3 different continents. So you keep this area in a destabilized fashion, then you can control the world. But if you have peace, if you have peaceful collaboration amongst all these countries who may not even like each other, they really don't have to. But the point is that you want to see a better future for your children. You want to see a better future for your people. And so I think what's happening in the United States, it's part of a global process. And I think that what we're doing with this International Peace Coalition is going to play a huge role in that, right? Getting RFK, to talk about his uncle's peace speech, right, at the American University. That's huge. That's what Americans need to hear. We used to be a nation that was anti-imperial. You wouldn't know that if you're 30 years old or younger, but we used to be. And I think that that's really what we have to inspire inside of what I'm working on and inspiring in my people in the United States, what I'm working on inspiring in other people. And I really want to, I was thinking about like what we can do in Britain. I was plotting in my mind how we can evoke that kind of inspiration there, because I've heard from many organizers that they're frustrated, like, what are we going to do? How are we going to, get this in motion? I think in every country, there's this strand of anti-imperialism, and you can find it throughout your history. And I think a big part of that is this Shakespearean strand, right? Or Percy B. Shelley, right? You have this strand of people who say that humanity is intrinsically good, and we reject this outlook of oligarchism. We reject this outlook of imperialism, and we want to fight for that. In whatever form that can look like. It'll look different in different countries, I think, because of our history and languages, but we should respect that. But I think in every country, you're going to have that strand. And I'd like to work with you guys in figuring out how to activate that, there's a video that I just gave into our tech team here of the intervention that I did on Barack Obama, which however you want to feel about Obama, I don't know, but he he is the one that financed the overthrow of Ukraine in 2014. We sent Victoria Nuland, who, my God, I don't know where we find these women. I mean, it makes me ashamed, to call her a woman, to have these beast women running around threatening the world in a nuclear holocaust like this. But I would like to play that. Folks can bring that up.
You overthrew Ukraine in 2014! You overthrew the legitimate Ukraine in 2014! Tell us about your plans for nuclear war with Russia! Stop provoking nuclear war with Russia! You're going to kill us with nuclear war! Russia's the enemy! Russia is not the enemy! Russia's the enemy! Stop getting us into nuclear war with Russia! No nuclear war! Victorian Nuland financed the overthrow!
Mr. President, there's more people that are going to get hurt if we go into nuclear war. Right now, we're on the verge of nuclear war thanks to what you did in Ukraine in 2014. Why won't you tell the truth about what you did to overthrow Ukraine in 2014? Will you tell the truth? Will you tell the truth?
There is a process that we set up in our democracy.
Yeah, but we're on the verge of nuclear war. Do you care about the lives of your supporters? Will you tell the truth before the world walks into world war? The coup of 2014 is on your doorstep. You were the one that allowed for a radical. Do you respect the lives of your own supporters? Will you tell the truth to us, or will you give back your peace prize?
Well, that was spirited. That's what's called doing battle. Anastasia Battle, thank you very much indeed for your part in this meeting this evening. Last word to the Oracle, Patrick Henningsen. Let me ask Patrick, if I may, the question I asked Anastasia. It is remarkable to me, maybe not to you. There are three possible presidents. So the most likely, I've just been looking at the betting, the bookies odds in an earlier broadcast I did with a political betting guy. And the three most likely are Joe Biden, RFK Jr., and Donald Trump. And two of those three are competing with each other as to which can be the more anti-war. That's a bit of a triumph, isn't it? An unexpected one.
Sure. Yeah, it is encouraging. It is encouraging. Add a fourth in there. If Joe Biden produces a sick note before the December, Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, would be potentially slotted in there one way or another. So that's number four. And he would be definitely pro-war alongside Joe Biden. I like the competition of ideas between RFK and Donald Trump. I think it's very encouraging that Trump, for all his faults, jumped out very quickly and said really the perfect thing that could be said, which was we need to stop the killing. You notice how the media, George, it's interesting with their gotcha questions. You know, they'll do this to every candidate. They'll put them on the spot. They'll say, you know, who do you want to win, Russia or Ukraine? And Donald Trump completely sidestepped that very skillfully and said, I don't care who wins. I want the killing to stop. I want the dying to stop, which is the correct position. And there is a huge anti-war vein which runs through the American electorate. It runs through American society. Demographically, very strong anti-war vein runs through the Great Lakes region, for instance. So Wisconsin, Michigan, Minnesota, and then jump to Washington State. And these would be Scandinavian Americans traditionally that will vote. That's a very strong anti-war bloc. Also, Quakers or people who descended from Quakers as well in places like Pennsylvania, upper state New York. So it's well known that this is a very strong voting bloc in America, so much so that successive U.S. presidents have always campaigned and successfully for no nation building, George Bush Jr., or we're going to bring the troops home from Iraq on day one of my presidency, said Barack Obama, and Donald Trump as well campaigned on an anti-war ticket. Out of those three presidents, only one of them made good on those promises to not start any new wars, and that was Donald Trump. He tried to bring the troops home from Syria, got gang tackled by everybody in the Senate and the Congress and the media and the deep state. They made sure that that didn't happen. Not everything Donald Trump did was positive in that regard during his presidency. Certainly made some egregious moves against Iran. And you mentioned Soleimani and Mohandas, very regrettable incident, in my opinion, for the United States and for the region and the world. But that said, this is what Americans want. This is what they vote for. The president who campaigns for anti-war themes has a mandate, has a real mandate. And I will posit that a Trump presidency in a second term will have very, very good chance of making good on that anti-war mandate, more so than he would in the first term when he had the whole system against him, multiple impeachments, etc., Mueller probe, all of the rest of it. So I'm very positive about that possibility. For the Democrats and Joe Biden, more of the same. In fact, maybe even worse. Who knows? So there's a stark difference there. Robert F. Kennedy Jr., his comments are hugely welcome. And what I love about RFK Jr. is he's brought that sanity back into the Democratic Party. It's okay to be a Democrat and be anti-war because of RFK. There's a silent majority out there that he is speaking to. These are including working class Democrats as well. So maybe he might even steal some of those Reagan blue dog Democrats away from Donald Trump. Perhaps. I like this. I think this is healthy, but they're already positioning the guns against RFK, putting him on the spot as they did just with the News Nation town hall meeting just the other night, where Elizabeth Vargas, I think her name was, the presenter, putting pressure on him. Are you going to accept the result, and will you run? But will you run as an independent if you don't get the nomination as a Democrat? Because they're scared to death that Robert F. Kennedy would run as an independent and take 6 or 7% or 10%, or do better than Jill Stein and Gary Johnson did, which would be devastating for a Biden reelection. So all of these things are to play for right now. I'm very excited, very positive that this conversation is happening on both sides of the two-party duopoly. And that can only be positive. But the RFK will come under vicious attacks continuously by the media, by the establishment. They will do anything to shut him down, keep him off the debate stage, to not have debates, full stop, even though that's what the American people want. That's what Democrats, I think, really want. Most Democrats, real Democrats, want to have that debate. They want to see these two candidates go head to head, toe to toe on these important issues. And ditto for the Republican Party as well. I want to see Donald Trump on the debate stage, not in a jail cell. We have a lot going on in America.
A race against time on that one, as indeed I'm afraid we have lost the race against time. Patrick Henningsen, thank you for that, and to our other speakers, Richard Medhurst and Anastasia Battle. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to Shan and Baz and Raf, who have technically got us on the air, and any other comrades that I haven't mentioned. from the Workers' Party of Britain, which I have the privilege to lead, who have also been busy behind the scenes. But most of all, I thank you, the audience. And I have one request for you. Please, if you have enjoyed what I think has been a feast of discussion, of narrative, of analysis, please share it with others, because that's the way we'll grow. If you like the video, send it to someone else. Like it with the thumbs up on the platform you're on. Subscribe to us. Follow us. No to NATO, no to war. And we'll see you, God willing, at the next meeting. Thank you for watching.